This is what I've been doing for 20 years, which is taking a complex situation, whether I'm an investor or a writer or a podcaster. I have habitually done this, which is take a complex situation and try to boil it down, not necessarily to the layman, because that a layman sort of implies someone doesn't know anything, but try to boil it down so that I'm not kind of subscribing to any one agenda. I'm presenting as neutral a view as possible, and maybe it's tinged with a little more hope than people usually see. I've gone from having generations of wealth to literally $100 in my bank account and losing my home and the IRS posting signs all over the house and losing my family to then bouncing back. So I kind of built up my own foundational practice. And when I talk to these neuroscientists and therapists or psychologists or whatever, often they give me advice so I understand my own practice a little bit more.
Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Weeks. Welcome to another episode of the Bounce Podcast. My guest today on the podcast is James Altucher. James is a former computer programmer, venture capitalist, hedge fund manager, author, financial journalist, serial founder, I think 20 plus companies. He's the publisher of over 20 plus books, and he's got a new book coming out next year. The guy is incredibly interesting, to say the least. To the point of this show, on his podcast, James has been talking with a lot of industry leaders and medical experts, specifically around the coronavirus, and recording them for his show. And he's also written a lot about this, and he has an Instagram Live. He's living in Manhattan, so he also is at, in my opinion, ground zero here in the States. So I thought if I could get him on the show, I'd shortcut and call him for a distillation or kind of a summary of what he's learned from all these experts. He's had about 9 episodes of his podcast talking to epidemiologists, MDs, economists, you name it, and I just could not keep up. So I thought I would just have him on and, like I said, shortcut this. I love talking to James. He's an open book. He's not afraid to think out loud and lean into the controversial. So this is my version of the coronavirus updates that are out there all over in podcast. So what, after all these interviews that James has had and conversations, has he concluded about what is happening now and what he predicts the near-term and long-term future will be for the U.S.? So we talk about the math used for the coronavirus spread, who got what wrong, flattening the curve, political risk for anyone with an opinion on what to do next, his view on when this will effectively end, and he explains why he has that view, the economic impact on the U.S. and what he thinks the country should do as to opening up businesses that may never return. So James speculates on specific business types and industries that may never return to normal, in his opinion, and those that he thinks will. And then we get into his own personal practices as to recovering from the setback, as he's been through many. Like I said, he lives in Manhattan. He's been through 9/11, plus with his 20 plus companies, he's gone bust, made millions, lost them, so on and so forth. So James is an expert, in my opinion, in bouncing back. So without further ado, here's James. James, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you so much, Larry. I really appreciate you asking me on.
So I'm trying to take a shortcut because I hear so much about the coronavirus. I can't keep up with the news. And you, probably since February, you had like 9 coronavirus updates of one sort or another. And you talked to doctors. One was from Johns Hopkins. One was from Harvard Medical School. Geneticist, economist, super forecasters. You had policy experts. You had a political operative, I think. You had business leaders, neuroscientists. So first of all, I can't keep up with everything, but I wanted you on as proxy. I want you to distill for me and my audience all this information, what you've learned, and how are you thinking about the virus and the impact to the economy and the impact to individuals.
You know, it's funny because I started to get worried like halfway through. This is like maybe 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago that, I'm getting kind of obsessed with coronavirus. and it's a little too much. Like it's not like I'm going to make my job coronavirus. I'm not a doctor. I'm not making policy, and so I even discussed this with my therapist. Am I spending too much time on this? Am I, right now we live in a very uncertain world, and there's nothing we can do to change most of the uncertainty. I mean, I find from talking to people, now I've talked to enough people, I can see what things are more certain than others. And I can see that a lot of people live with a lot more uncertainty than they should right now. But still, no matter what, even if you know everything right now, there's more uncertainty than certainty. And my therapist's point is that this is what I've been doing for 20 years, which is taking a complex situation, whether I'm an investor or a writer or a podcaster, I have habitually done this, which is take a complex situation and try to boil it down, not necessarily to the layman, because that a layman sort of implies someone doesn't know anything, but try to boil it down so that I'm not kind of subscribing to any one agenda. I'm presenting as neutral a view as possible, and maybe it's tinged with a little more hope than people usually see, because I find everybody's got an agenda. Every group has got an agenda, even if, and I don't say a malicious agenda, it might be a good agenda, but they have an agenda anyway. And so a lot of times in a crisis, the agenda might be, hey, this is serious. We need to be a little bit scared. So if I'm the expert, I might have an agenda to leave out some information that is too comforting because I want people to take this seriously. So, I might talk to a doctor and they might say, this was more in the beginning than now. They might say there's a 3% fatality rate if someone gets infected. Well, then we'd go over the math, and it turns out it's not a 3% fatality rate. It's significantly less, and they would agree, but they would keep saying the 3% fatality rate because that would be, again, I'm not saying they're malicious. That's what they're being told, and that's what they're worried about. And if their best belief is that a complete lockdown is the right solution.
Well, they don't want to be caught on the wrong end of that, right? The risk to their reputation is probably huge.
Right. And it's funny. Reputation risk is a very interesting thing because you could decide, you remember the John F. Kennedy book? He wrote it, I believe, in like 1957 or 58, Profiles in Courage. So it was politicians from American history who would stand up and do something, even if it was against their best career interests. And you don't really see profiles in courage right now. What you do see, though, are experts who legitimately are experts in their field, who do believe that a certain idea should be, respected or even treated as fact until we have a better idea in place. And I respect that. Like, these are experts who know what they're doing, who are doing real hardcore research and have spent 30 years studying something. And so they know the order in which information should be released. But when you start talking to people of multiple disciplines, what you realize, and what I started to realize, and this was kind of the fascinating macro thing I realized, because there's a lot of discussion right now about experts in quotes. So is an expert truly an expert? Is a mathematical model truly a quote unquote model? And what I realize is that every expert is an expert in their lane, but then they don't know even a slight lane a few inches away. They don't know that lane at all. And so I was getting this more macro perspective. Like you said, here's an epidemiologist, here's an immunologist, here's a medical doctor, but who's a healthcare policy specialist. Here's an economist. Here's a hedge fund manager, which is different than an economist. Here's a neuroscientist who might, looking further, might have better ways of dealing with the, what's happening in terms of our stress during this lockdown and so on. So everybody is good at their lane, but I would notice they really would be clueless, absolutely clueless about other things. Like I would have doctors say to me, oh, we could open up in 2023 maybe. And then I would have, economists saying, oh no, there'd be complete anarchy if we did that. We need to open up 9 months from now. And then I would have other people who would say, no, we need to be open up yesterday. And all of this would be based on the same medical data that's available to all of us, but their opinions would change.
And in this politically charged environment, it adds to the confusion because I started saying recently, man, I wonder if this lockdown is going to be worse than the overall impact of the disease itself.
There's no way to even pose that question. So here's an experiment I did. I said, let A be the number of future COVID deaths in the US, and let B be the number of future extra deaths that might occur, from suicides or domestic violence or prevention of elective medical procedures and so on. So let B be the number of future deaths during the lockdown. Which is greater, A or B? That was my question. I didn't even ask if we should open the economy or not. I just said, which number is greater, A or B? And I said, I sincerely don't know because I don't. And what do other people think are the answer? And suddenly I got on one side, I got like, yeah, this is just like climate change. We need to open up the economy right now. And the other is, what are you for, Trump? You're blocked now. And I've never actually voted in my life, which you could have, that's another discussion, but I'm apolitical. And I would say to people, I don't understand why my question is bipartisan. Can you explain to me? And they would say, well, clearly Trump wants this or that. And I would say, oh, no, I thought Trump's guidelines were written up by the guidelines for opening the economy were written up by Dr. Fauci, who has worked for both Democrat and Republican administrations. I thought that's bipartisan, but nobody would let me get away with it. Like everyone's like, you must be for Trump. Just admit it. Are you a Trumpster? And I'm like, I don't even vote. So I just want to know which group is going to die more. Is there any evidence on either side? Tell me. And I said, I'll sincerely believe what people tell me if they show me evidence. And nobody would do that. They would just argue politically.
Well, let's get into more trouble here. So you've talked to all these people. So let's first talk about the virus and the impact of coronavirus and the early projections and where we are now. It looks like as of the 9th of April, hospitalization started slowing in New York. So I keep looking at New York as kind of proxy.
Which is not unreasonable because, New York and New Jersey combined, the cases and the deaths are greater than the other 48 states combined.
Yeah. So it looked starting on the 9th or so that the curve started to flatten. And so it looks like we're going to greatly undershoot what was projected as to the number of deaths in the country. I mean, I heard some things from researchers. I talked to researchers early on. James, they scared the shit out of me.
Yeah, because they were saying the problem that they were having is that at some point it's a math question. You can't determine the effect of the virus by looking at its genomic sequence because we don't really know enough about it. So it becomes a math question. You say, okay, it seems every person who has it seems to be infecting, X number of people. So that's what they call the R naught. And if that's the case, and if this is growing exponentially, then in 3 weeks, there's going to be 4 quadrillion people who have it. And if it's a 3% fatality rate, that means the entire planet's dead. And that would be like kind of, I'm not even exaggerating so much the initial projections. But what they didn't seem to understand, and again, this is epidemiologists sometimes don't understand math. So now I should take that back. They do understand math, but exponential math, you're dealing with exponential math in what's called a bounded group. So ultimately, it's like a learning curve. If I start studying golf, my knowledge of golf and my ability at golf will grow exponentially every few days if I'm taking lessons, if I'm practicing, and so on. But then at some point, I'm bounded, by my physical abilities, by my brain, and so on. And so it'll start to level off. A learning curve is exponential growth in a bounded group. And so then you have to ask, if your scenario matches exponential, if it qualifies to be exponential growth in a bounded group, you have to ask, well, how many times does it double before it starts leveling off? And very few scientists were asking that question. In fact, still the only research paper I've seen that from medical professionals that did ask, how many times does this virus double before it starts going into more of the top of an S? You run out of population, you run out of 80-year-old people, you come up against herd immunity, you come up against other genetic or other factors that could affect it. Like we don't know about the effect of heat yet. We don't know about herd immunity yet, but there's a wide range of factors that could slow down, that make the population bounded. We don't know what all of them are, but we do know that the group is bounded. And the only paper I saw that researched this was USC, and they're like, okay, in every single country, regardless of the strategy, it seems to double 4 or 5 times, and then it seems to have a base amount, and then that base amount will double 4 or 5 times, and then it'll start leveling off. So even back in like late February, early March, when I started talking about this on Instagram Lives, I was saying, look, by April 15th, this will probably peak in the US, give or take a week. And by June 1st, it'll probably be pretty much eliminated from the US, which is, at least this wave, which is pretty much what's happening. And I was basing this on just how many times it had doubled in Italy, Spain, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and a few other places. And again, every one of those countries I mentioned did a completely different strategy, but they all had the same curve. And now the people under that curve was different. So that's the whole flattening the curve thing. But, so that's a starting point of analyzing this, because people would say, oh my gosh, there's going to be 20 million deaths in the US if we don't do anything. And I couldn't understand how that could happen. No matter what country you looked at, there was no reasonable scenario that got you to even 1 million deaths. So now they say maybe China lied, blah, blah, blah. I believe that there's certainly more than 3,000 deaths in China, which is what they report. But okay, multiply that by 50, 150,000 deaths, still not 1 million. And China's got 4 times the number of people as the US.
So where are you right now as today? Are you still kind of sticking to what you were projecting or thinking?
I mean, the very first interview I did with this was with a great guy. He's the top immunologist at Imperial College, which was one of the universities putting out the first projections. There's 2 different groups. And actually, my friend there is part of a different group. He's more just on the hardcore research side. He wasn't making any projections, but there were 2 different groups making projections out of Imperial, and they kind of went back and forth on their projections several times. So it's kind of unclear what the agendas were. But in any case, I started talking with him. I talked to 2 or 3 other epidemiologists, immunologists, and I talked to people in public policy who are MDs. And so I'm kind of still where I was initially, which is that the US has passed its peak, and by June 1st, it'll slow down to almost nothing, at least in terms of new hospitalizations, just like New York City is down to almost no new hospitalizations. Then there's the question, do you reopen at the peak? Do you reopen when you see no new hospitalizations? That's a little less clear. And then there's the question, do you see a second wave? That also is completely unclear. Like I saw a headline the other day, and this is just an example of what we've been talking about, but I saw this headline, CDC chief says likely that second wave will be much worse than first wave. And so I'm like, that seems like an odd prediction. So I clicked on the article, and the only quote from the CDC chief was, there's a possibility the second wave could come around the same time as the flu, and then it'll be complicated to diagnose this. That was the only quote.
It's clickbait. So I'll open the Washington Post, and I'm reading Wall Street Journal. I'm trying to have a rational, just an objective kind of NPR type of reading habit. But it's just real difficult because I'll open the Washington Post. There's no good news. The curve is going down. They never publish anything like that because it's just not sensational enough or something. I don't get it.
Right. And so eventually what I started doing was I just simply stopped looking, because after talking to like a whole bunch of doctors, like the experts in the world on this, and then talking to everybody ranging from healthcare policy officials to economists, even outside of my podcast, I talked to people high up, very high up in the administration. I talked to people in Congress, on both sides of the table. So some of these I couldn't put on my podcast, and some of them were just through email, kind of reporting to them what I was seeing and seeing how they would respond. And my conclusion is that everything was going to go on the curve, at least according to what I said. And I'll tell you where I was wrong. So I feel like I was right on when the peak happened and when we'll see the end of this. I'm a little bit off on the number of deaths. I thought there would be 60,000 or fewer deaths. There's probably going to be, I do agree with this latest projection, there's probably going to be around 70,000 deaths. But remember, they were talking millions at first, and then they were talking 250,000 and then 100,000. 2.2 was the first I saw, and then 1. So I stopped looking at that, and I started focusing on, should there be a lockdown, or assuming there should be a lockdown, how long should it last? And if it lasts too long, what could happen? And then I talked to somebody who was deputy chairman of the Federal Reserve, which is really planning their federal stimulus around this question of how long this should last and how long can the economy survive. And even that was, there's a lot of uncertainty. And there were a lot of people just wrong, saying, a lot of experts contradicting each other. And so I decided to focus on the only thing, I decided to lean into that uncertainty, which is that we don't know about a lot, and focus on, well, what should I be doing now? And what should other people be doing now to kind of take advantage of this situation? And I don't mean, people are saying, oh, write a book during this time, or, oh, do those projects you never wanted to do. Like, I always feel like that's a homework assignment on top of a crisis. And like, that's the last thing I want to need.
Well, maybe is this an opportunity, or could this be an opportunity?
Yeah. Could this be an opportunity, or could this be an opportunity to just rest and not do anything?
In other words, those who never take vacation, well, here's your shot.
Yeah. Or, and even then you kind of have to give yourself time off of judging yourself. So people will say, oh, I didn't do anything during this time, or all I did was binge watch. Maybe it was good for you to catch up on 75 Netflix shows. I don't know. Like, I guess after talking to all these people, I feel like I know some things that are certain, and I know a lot of things that are uncertain. So it's pretty certain the curve is as I thought, which is that it'll, again, it probably peaked even around the world in many cases, mid-April, give or take a week or so. Maybe for some parts it'll peak in early May. And then I do think by June 1st, again, give or take, it'll be largely down to zero. It does seem, by the way, despite what people might say, it does seem that heat does have a positive effect on killing the virus. So if you have a chance to go outdoors in 80-degree weather and humid 80-degree weather, it does seem either the humidity or the heat, one or the other, or both, seems to have a negative effect on the virus.
Yeah, we're down here in Florida, and they opened up Jacksonville Beach, and they looked to be separated by families, and it wasn't packed, but there were fake pictures on Twitter of the beach being packed, and people were attacking people in Florida on Twitter. Just, you're dumb, Darwin, hope Darwin takes you. And to me, just on the face of it, I'm like, these people are going to Costco. These people are going to grocery stores. They're touching stuff that other people have touched. Here's people outdoor in the sunshine.
Yeah, and by the way, vitamin D also is likely to hurt the virus. So little kids playing on the beach is probably the healthiest thing they can do. By the way, even those people who say it's airborne, like, oh, it could survive in the air for 27 feet or whatever, that may or may not be true. Who knows? I'm assuming people who did that study are correct, but no one has proven that you can get infected that way. Here's what the Imperial College guy I spoke to, Dr. Peter Openshaw. He's very, very smart guy. I've known him. He's not just someone I randomly called. I've known him for a very long time. And he was the expert for the EU on SARS, on swine flu, on MERS. And his main research has been, how do you get this? And so he's done all sorts of research. And basically, it's the obvious thing. If someone has severe symptoms and is standing next to you and coughing on you constantly, that's the easiest way to get it. And if someone's asymptomatic and just passing you on the street, that's the hardest way to get it. So it's exactly what you would think, that it's like a poison. The more of the poison you get, the more likely you are to get the virus.
James, I have a friend who was jogging around a lake, and a lady, he wasn't wearing a mask. He's by himself jogging around a lake. A lady from the sideline yelled at him for not wearing a mask.
Yeah. And look, I get where that lady's coming from too, because if you just, a lot of people think if you read the newspaper, you're going to be informed. When in fact, it's actually the exact opposite. Like, the newspaper's never informed anyone of anything. I mean, I've written for newspapers. I can tell you for a fact, they're not informative. But most people don't realize that. So I understand that we're trained from birth that the media is kind of like this fourth branch of government. And this is where you get your news. It's like a good check on government and its freedom of speech. That's where you get that freedom. And so people get informed from that. But like you said, fear is where they get their page views and their advertising revenues and so on. They have an agenda. So someone who is legitimately scared of this virus, and the media says, oh, well, no, the second wave is likely going to be far worse, and there's going to be still 1 million people that are going to die from this, and it's going to be the elderly, and it's the most painful death ever. They're going to be scared, and then they come out and say masks are not good, but then they say later, you absolutely need masks, or you're going to transmit it to everyone around you because everybody around asymptomatic people 20 feet away are going to get it. It's scary to those people. So I understand where that lady's coming from too.
Yeah, I get it. And my friend he was very nice in his response. He was, real thoughtful. But, and by the way, I just disclaimer, I've been quarantining myself. I was sequestered. I'm social distant. I'm doing everything everybody's telling me. I'm not, I'm not I'm not a virus denier at all. I'm just starting to wonder.
And that's just it. Like, so I'm not a virus denier. The virus obviously is very real. It's very dangerous. I would not want to get the virus. I wouldn't want anyone in my family to get it. By the way, 3 people in my family have gotten it, in my family that I'm living with, that I'm quarantined with, including my wife. And I didn't get it, but I probably got it asymptomatically. I haven't had a test. But the flip side is, okay, in terms of the virus, what we don't know is, will there be a second wave? Will there be a second season? Will there be a vaccine? Will there be a cure? Does hydroxychloroquine work? Does the other drugs work? Does vitamin D work? Does vitamin C work? There's a lot of anecdotal evidence of some things that work. And so my approach has been kind of to take everything, that's not a recommendation. I'm not a doctor. Nobody has recommended that to me at all, but I'm just doing all of it. But I do think we do know that the elderly, and this is sort of obvious, the elderly get it above the age of 75 or 80. And I mean, in Italy, the average age of someone dying from this is 80. Guess what? The average lifespan in Italy is 79.5. So there's no new net increase in deaths in Italy, because these are all people who had, and 95% of the people who had it in Italy, who died of it in Italy, had 3 or more pre-existing conditions. So essentially, if you're over 75 and you have diabetes, you absolutely should quarantine.
Yeah. Good news is we're going to learn a lot through this, right? And hopefully going forward, be more prepared and know what works, what doesn't work. So you're fairly certain we flattened, and it looks like the summer will be more and more good news. What are your thoughts about the economy as we start lighting up various areas and states?
So I'm an investor. I'm an investor in a wide array of industries, a private investor. So it means the difference between that and a public investor for this purpose is that I get to call the CEO and say, hey, how's it going? What are you seeing? So I've been able to call all my companies and see from the ground what they're seeing. Also, I own a storefront location in New York City. I own a comedy club / bar that is closed right now. And so I've been seeing everything from, in my community, I've been seeing everything from that point of view as well. I know all the other, storefront owners and what their success is with getting the small business loans and so on.
Will this be an L, a W, a V, or U?
Yeah, so I think that's an unknown, but I would say just on past experience, it's going to be a W. And the reason is we've already had the steep fall for the first part of the W, and we've had a little bit of a bounce. But, right now the stock market is where it was, I don't know, 6 months ago or 7 months ago. I don't know. So the economy was really different then than it is now. There's a lot more uncertainty now.
What does that say to us? Does that say the retail investor are delusional, or the hedge fund guy? I mean, does that say anything? Should we ignore what the stock market is doing?
No, but I think most people think the stock market is a measurement of the health of the economy. That's not true at all. The stock market is really a measure of the level of certainty versus uncertainty in people's minds. So, 2 months ago, when the market started to collapse, like 2 months ago today, there was a lot of uncertainty. Is this going to be 100 million deaths? Is this going to be a new age of anarchy? Like, we were talking Mad Max, Road Warrior type stuff. So there was so much uncertainty. It was the biggest collapse ever. It was the most uncertainty we've ever seen, more than the Great Recession, more than the Great Depression, and so on. So it collapsed. Now we have a lot more certainty. Looks like we can see the light at the end of the tunnel for the opening of the economy, whether it happens tomorrow or 2 months from now. There's light at the end of that tunnel. There's some certainty. We also have certainty that a stimulus package involving trillions of dollars, greater than ever any other stimulus ever, has been passed. So there's that certainty, and there's certainty about the virus ending before a second wave might hit.
So can we use the green on a stock market board or the red? Is it some part of signal as to a lot of smart people making some bets?
Yeah, it's a lot of smart people saying that the worst case scenario didn't happen. But then what's going to happen is the media is going to say, and again, that's their job, but the media will say, looks like second wave happening, and this time it's worse, or second wave happening, and this time little kids are having strokes. So there's going to be crazy headlines. And then here's the other thing that's going to happen. We've been so focused on just the macro economy. What's going to happen as we start to reopen is that the tide's going to come in and we're going to see which industries were truly standing naked under the water. And so, for instance, commercial real estate, it's impossible to predict what will happen, but WeWork is the biggest renter in New York City. WeWork's going to go out of business. And so if you're a commercial lender to commercial real estate, how are you going to fill up 8 floors in your building? Well, WeWork's just going to disappear. You're going to have to clean it up. You're going to have to find big companies to rent in those spaces during a very uncertain time for real estate. And then what are you going to do with all the restaurants? This is 20% of restaurants at least are going to go out of business. You can't just put a clothing store in that space. It's got a kitchen. It's got room for seating. It's got bathrooms. Like, it's made to be a restaurant. No one on July 1st is going to say, boy, I can't wait to open up a pizza restaurant in New York City. That's not going to happen. So those landlords and then commercial real estate companies, they're not going to get paid. And that's kind of a financial crisis. W would be a sharp decline and then a move up like we've just had. We've moved up from whatever, Dow below 20,000 to Dow 24,000 or 23,000. Again, I don't like to look at the stock market every day. And then from here or from 25,000 or whatever, you'll see a low. This is just my guess because no one can predict the tops and the bottoms.
Yeah, the whole thing here is a guess. I get it. Yep.
Right. But this is just my own personal thinking. Like, I'll tell you what I'm personally doing, which is even though I do think there are companies and stocks that are great value right now, I'm just not putting my money in the stock market because just like after 9/11 and just like after the financial crisis, both of those were W's. And we saw a sharp decline, a move up for 3 months, and then a sharp decline that went even lower. So in March 2002 is when we truly hit the lows after 9/11. In March of 2009 is when we really saw the lows after 2008. There's going to either be a second wave or lots of headlines about a second wave. And there's either going to be industries like restaurants or commercial real estate or industries we can't even fathom right now. There's going to be big companies that are going out of business. I walk around New York City right now and about 20% of the restaurants, all the restaurants are closed, but about 20% of the restaurants are closed and available for rent, meaning they're gone. And that's before this economy even reopens. I don't know why they were so eager because maybe they could have waited a little bit, but there's going to be more of that. And we don't know the full extent to which companies are just wiped out already at this point. And so that's why I think we're going to get afraid. There's going to be uncertainty and we're going to have another short spike down and then move up. But again, I don't know. I could be just guessing. There's also $6 trillion in overall stimulus that's going to flood the economy. So this stimulus is very interesting. It's unlike any stimulus we've ever seen before. And I'm not just talking about the amount. I mean, the amount is enormous. Like if you count what the Federal Reserve is doing with the voted on stimulus packages, this is just unbelievable. Not to mention, by the way, we already were in a good economy before this. So in 2008, 2009, we were in a bad economy and then the stimulus happened. Now we were in a good economy, which has been artificially made bad. But, this economy has been shot in the head. But I do think we're going to see the stimulus work to some extent by Q3, Q4. Because so the other thing that's different about this is we have short-term, medium-term, long-term stimulus, which we've never had before. So in 2008, 2009, we only had a long-term stimulus put in place. And by long-term, I mean when the Federal Reserve takes an action, it usually takes about 12 to 18 months for that action to really kick in. And that's what we saw in 2008. It took about really to the end of 2009, 2010, and even in 2010, there was another 20% dip. 2011, there's another 20% dip. So it took a while. Long-term stimulus takes a while to really flood the economy. So all the Federal Reserve rate cuts and even them going out and buying mortgage-backed securities, which they've never done before, all of that's going to take, let's call it 6 to 24 months before we really see it. But the stimulus checks, the $1,200 and the unemployment and the small business loans, well, the unemployment and the stimulus checks, that's going to be felt right now. Like people applying for unemployment insurance, they're making more money in many cases than they made at their jobs. So that's an unusual situation.
So all the stimulus bodes well for us, at least in the long term.
And the short term. Because the unemployment is like, if you're suddenly staying at home and making more money than you made, and that's 20 million people. And, a lot of those people actually, here's the other thing. A lot of the unemployed are not unemployed. The rules changed. You're allowed to be a part-time worker and file for unemployment now. You're allowed to be self-employed and file for unemployment. So the rules changed, the money went up, and the duration went up. So that's going to have a big short-term effect. The medium-term effect is the small business loans. For instance, my bar/comedy club, we got a small business loan that equals to 2.5 times payroll. And you have to pay the employees with that. But some of the employees are not coming back. They left the city. They're gone. So, we still are going to spend the money. So that's going to have a medium-term effect as businesses start to spend, $700 billion that we all just got. And not to mention the $500 billion for unemployment and then the $400 billion for the stimulus checks.
So do you think that's going to, among other things, trickle into people starting businesses or opening up new, maybe different restaurants or what have you? I mean, do you see a lot more startups in this scenario, or?
Yeah, I see startups, which again, startups take time to affect the economy. Like if J.C. Penney goes bankrupt, which it did go bankrupt, and Neiman Marcus files for bankruptcy, which it did, J.C. Penney was going to go out of business within 5 years anyway. But if you scale it out over time, it has a less effect on the economy. But there will be startups. But here's what's going to happen: people are just going to simply spend money. If you were making $600 a week at your job, but now you're making $1,100 a week because of unemployment, then you're just going to spend more money. And that's going to be good for the economy. So yes, people who were kind of, let's say, upper middle class, they owned these businesses or they were managers and they had a stock portfolio and they were, kind of happy in their stable jobs. They're going to be hurt the most because they're not getting unemployment and they're not getting the stimulus check perhaps, and they're going to have to figure out what to do. People who are on unemployment, who are not being rehired, they have time till July 31st, and maybe that'll even be extended. They have time to figure out what they'll do. But I do see the gig economy picking up, the side hustle economy, the startup economy. I'm even thinking of startups I could do for the first time in years.
I am too. I'm also looking at potentially buying some businesses that may be distressed.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Buying businesses, like there's there's a site called empireflippers.com where you could buy these e-commerce sites. I just saw a site for sale that makes surgical masks, and they're going to stay in business for a while, and they're up for sale because the guy's got other businesses that make more money for him. This is why it's not going to be a new normal. It's going to be a new abnormal. Like, what does it look like with only, half the restaurants alive, with no movie theaters alive, with commercial real estate out of business?
So hang on about movie theaters. So let's talk about this real briefly. You don't think movie theaters are going to make it, I'm assuming.
I don't think movie theaters are going to make it, or at least some movie theaters will go out of business and some movie theaters, because they're the last ones left, are going to flourish. But take what happened this past weekend. Universal released a movie. I think it was called Trolls Without Borders. It was the sequel to Trolls, a movie I have never heard of. So the sequel to Trolls came out from Universal, and within 3 weeks, it came out 3 weeks ago. So the 3-week revenues of Trolls Without Borders, the sequel of Trolls, was $95 million, which greatly exceeded the original Trolls. Now, it wasn't released in movie theaters. It was only released on Amazon and Apple and maybe one other service. So it was released on demand. They made more money. And by the way, Universal took a bigger cut. They took 80%. And with the movie theaters, they only get 50-50. So Trolls Without Borders, undeniably probably the worst movie in history, a sequel to another movie that was probably the second worst movie in history, made more money and more profits for Universal. But AMC, in retaliation, said to Universal, we're never airing your movies again. So I don't know, and AMC's on the verge of bankruptcy.
But I want my popcorn. I want the huge screen and all that. What, do you think we're just going to put 100-inch screens in our homes?
No. But like, let's say that I'm just making it up. Let's say there's 20 movie theaters in your town. Maybe now there will be 5.
Yeah. I see them maybe taking out seats here and there. And
yeah, but if you do that, you can't really do that too much. Like they're saying in Texas with restaurants, oh, you're not allowed to be 25% more, you're not allowed to be more than 25% full. Well, on weekends, restaurants make all their money on the weekends. You kind of have to be 100% full on the weekends with a line out.
Every square foot is money,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're only 25% full, you're out of business. Now, I own a stand-up comedy club. We kind of have to be 100% full on the weekends because the rest of the week we're less than 25% full.
So let's talk about that. What are you going to do? And how are you going to do it?
Well, we have to reopen just because that's kind of the terms of the PPP loan. And, we have to pay our employees and so on if we don't want to, if we want the loan forgiven. And look, the reason you own a comedy club is not for profit, but it's because you love comedy. But there is a question, like, who's going to go out in New York City to see a bunch of, let's face it, mediocre comedians?
These these are probably regional issues, right? They're probably, maybe Florida and Oklahoma and Texas, maybe less concern or less fear than, let's say, in New York. I'm just guessing.
Let me ask you this. When you watch TV now and you see a crowded office or restaurant, do you get a little nervous when you see it on TV?
No, I when I see stuff on TV, I'm like, man, I hope we get back. Let me tell you, I can't wait to be stuck in traffic, because that's an indicator of a healthy country, possibly, and economy.
I can't wait for everybody to start arguing about Megxit again. Meghan Markle, Prince Harry.
Yeah. It's just normal. I'm watching TV, looking at it. Do you find yourself looking at, it's almost like pre and post 9/11. It feels like that. It's like, oh, that's how the world was. People are just talking.
Can I tell you? I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but I have a good analogy for this that someone asked me about, and I sort of subscribe to this, but then I sort of not, which is, we're all like drug addicts that are in rehab right now. So you get into rehab and you're like using a lot of drugs and you're fighting like, I'm not staying in rehab. And then by the time you leave the rehab, you've stopped using drugs. You swear to God, you're never going to use drugs again. And then you go home and you start hanging out at the same places with the same friends and you start using drugs again. So my friend was suggesting that as an analogy to, we all say we're not going to we're going to keep wearing masks. We're not going to be near each other. We're not going to movies. We're not going to restaurants. But when this is all over, maybe that was then, this is now, and we'll be like the drug addict who starts using again. We'll just all go back to restaurants and movie theaters. That's a possibility.
I don't think you can beat evolution. Life will find a way, right? I think, yes, at some point, I agree with you. It's hardwired in us. Let me ask you this. Have you noticed this? I just started reading about proxemics. It's the study of the proximity or distance from connection. So I noticed, I went to a neighborhood concert, James, where people were sitting in their driveway, and there were some talented people, some friends of mine, that had a speaker set up, and there was a guitar, and they started singing in their driveway. And so the neighbors came out. They just sat in their driveway, so everybody's distancing and listening. It was very nice. But my best friend was sitting across the street, and so I remember talking to him. I never felt so disconnected, and I didn't really think about it till after it was over. I'm like, man, I just felt so disconnected. And then it happened again. We visited on Easter some friends. We were across the street talking to them. We dropped off an Easter basket. I was wandering everywhere. We weren't connected. And then when we got on Zoom, I felt connected. Like I'm talking to them face to face, and all of a sudden we're talking privately or intimately. And it's just this weird phenomenon where even if you're in person, you're disconnected because of the distance. So I started studying on proxemics, and the distance. I think it's like 18 inches is intimate, and then up to 4 feet is relational or something, and then beyond that, you're less connected.
Well, I'll look that up, and I'm curious why the difference on Zoom also. Because the other thing I was just thinking as you were saying that is, my guess is when you usually run into your friend, you shake their hand or you hug them or whatever, and on our skin is oxytocin receptors, and oxytocin is the neurochemical that functions as pair bonding, so that when two members of the tribe touch each other, they feel like, oh, you feel happier because you're part of the tribe, and the tribe protects you, so you're safe from the jungles and the lions. So you're able to touch friends and loved ones, the more safe you feel in your tribe. And we've all gone through these periods where we're not touching, and that causes stress. The brain starts to think, have I just been kicked out of the tribe? Are lions going to eat me? So, there's that effect as well.
I think part of the Zoom or the FaceTiming or the proxemics, the issue with proximity is seeing facial tics and seeing little facial movements that evolutionary you kind of pick up that send signals along with the words that people are saying. So I'm recommending to people, I said, don't talk to your friends over the phone. Try to get them on a camera. Try to talk to them that way, at least right now.
On what I was saying earlier, though, about I kind of believe that the drug rehab model that we were talking about, but also at the same time, in terms of a new normal, it is the case that probably 20 or 30% of small businesses are just simply out of business already.
Does the economy absorb those people fairly easily because we're awash in stimulus, or?
From a macro point of view, yes. From a micro point of view, no. So if you were in charge, if you were the owner of a mom and pop restaurant that's been open for 40 years, are you happy just to get, a stimulus check and unemployment? No, that was your home. That was your family, that restaurant for 40 years, and now you don't have it. And here's the way the Federal Reserve modeled the stimulus package. Every quarter, the economy spends about 5 trillion. They assumed this quarter, Q2, would be about a 40% decline. They modeled out there would be 2.2 trillion less in spending. And so that's why, guess what the stimulus package is? $2.2 trillion. So it's dollar for dollar. And on top of it, they threw in all the Federal Reserve rate cuts. I mean, they did enormous rate cuts and other things that are more esoteric.
So the economy may be fine over this period, but personally, people are going to be suffering.
Right. So the economy will be fine. The money is going to flow somewhere. And some people will benefit. Some people won't. Some people will hurt. And, some rich will get richer. Some poor will get poorer. And some people in the middle will suddenly find themselves broke. So that's why I say on a micro level, it's a little scary because that by itself could lead to a lot of uncertainty and unrest. But the economy as a whole, like GDP, should come back. I don't think there's going to be a depression. There's going to be a recession because the Q1, by the technical definition, there's going to be 2 down quarters in a row. Q1, if it had been an up quarter, we wouldn't have had a recession, but it turns out today we find out that it's a down quarter. Q2 obviously is going to be a huge, like mega down quarter. But then Q3, $1 trillion is going to get spent just from the stimulus checks. And then Q4, we're going to start to see the Federal Reserve rate cuts kick in. So there'll be more lending for mortgages and home buying and so on. And that triggers a lot of employment. And so by Q4, macroeconomically, we're going to be well out of a recession. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of individual suffering across the board, which is scary. And there's a lot of uncertainty there.
When do you think New York will open?
There's when do I think it will, and there's when do I think it should. There's always a good reason and there's a real reason. So Cuomo has kind of implied, Governor Cuomo, who's as far as I know, he's a good governor. This is our first time we're kind of being in touch with policy. Never before have I cared what the governor has done or the mayor or the president, but now I really care. And he's kind of implied parts of New York State will open May 15th, but probably not New York City. He's implied that. So maybe by June 1st, maybe after that, who knows? But I do think since we flattened the curve, the New York City hospital system is not overwhelmed by any stretch of the imagination at this point. Since we flattened the curve, which I thought was the goal, was to not overwhelm the healthcare system. So they're moving the target a little bit, which is fine. I can't control that. And we should be open already. In terms of meeting their initial goal, we should be open. I'm here in June, July, but again, I think it depends because if you have a bunch of states open up this week, a lot of states are opening up this week.
Will that put pressure on New York?
That's what I hope will happen. I think that's an uncertainty. Like, I don't think any government wants to be the last in line, particularly if the strategy of opening up works. So I don't think any government wants to open up last and then have their hand out for a federal bailout because there'll be an easy excuse to not give them that bailout. So I'm hoping other agendas kind of intersect. But right now there's also an agenda of, being very cautious. Maybe there's a political agenda. You have to kind of question everything that's going on in terms of agendas and messaging.
So let me ask you this. What businesses are you betting on? Would you bet on as we come out of this? So obviously online learning and things revolving that. Right now I'm developing a tool, James, or at least I'm working on a tool that will pull all the online courses outside of the universities for people that want to put a course online. They'll be able to sort by bestseller and topic and keywords and traffic to see what's in demand.
Let me get involved in that. That sounds great. Do they all have APIs that let you do that?
Most of them. Otherwise, I'm just going to do it manually. You know what I mean? I'll Turk it or something, but most of them do.
I think something like what you just came up with, that's a business model that previously wouldn't have been thought of, but I think that's an incredibly valuable idea. Because for instance, just today, I was looking at some online course sites because Coursera made some announcement. They said their business is doing as expected. They're doing business better than ever. I was an investor in Teachable, which just a few weeks ago, right in the middle of this lockdown, got bought for $256 million. So, and I don't even know, they weren't making a lot of revenues. So they did very well. And, I think like you say, online learning is going to be big, but then alternative models on top of online learning. So there's three players, right? There's the people making online courses. They will do well if they have a successful course now. Online learning companies will do well, but they're already kind of well positioned. But then this third category of new ideas, which is the where uncertainty exists, like what you're coming up with, fair amount of those are going to do very well.
Do you think digital marketing agencies are hurt or would benefit from this longer term?
Benefit, huge. During this period, I've hired two. So those are going to do well.
Because there's things you're urgently trying to get out and expose to the populace. Is that right?
Yeah, and also I'm trying to develop a comprehensive strategy. Like I've been sort of, I have a generally good social media outreach. I have an audience on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Quora, but I don't have a cohesive strategy to kind of, what do I do with these people? I just try to cater to them by giving them more and more free content, and it's worth just. I have a book coming out in a year, and I always tell people if you want to market a book, you got to start preparing a year in advance. So I'm just kind of getting the tool set ready to market this book and still provide the most value to my audience along the way across many platforms. And so I think because content creation is going to be bigger than ever, I think digital marketing agencies and even virtual assistants that help people with digital marketing will, so if you're just an individual and you're not starting an agency, you could be a virtual assistant and really greatly help people with their digital marketing outreach, and then even hire virtual assistants underneath you to scale your business and so on. So again, we're talking startup ideas, but the whole idea of coming up with startups around the word remote is going to be successful. Now there's some startups or there's some ideas with remote that you and I can't do. For instance, I can't make a drone company that's going to deliver from the grocery store to your backyard. But they're already testing drones that are delivering to backyards in North Dakota. And I'm not going to create a self-driving company, but those companies are going to move even faster. I'm not going to create a telemedicine robotics company, but those companies are going to move faster. So those are the obvious ones. And then you know what? Guess what? A pizza restaurant in New York City might do great because 40% of the restaurants might go out of business in New York City. So suddenly, if everybody's like you and says, oh, I got to get out there, but 40% of the restaurants are closed, guess what? Depending on the regulations, a new restaurant might be good, or a food truck. A food truck's going to be a great business, or the Uber of food trucks. Like I want, a pizza. So, okay, there's a food truck. I look on my Uber for food trucks. There's a food truck 6 blocks away. Come on over here. You can park right outside. You'll get all the customers here, and then I'll go down and get my pizza. I'll order my pizza so it's ready for me.
Let me ask you this as we kind of wrap this. You've also talked to neuroscientists, you've talked to some psychologists, what have you. What are the best tips that you have gotten from these type of people as to dealing with this kind of a setback? People are stuck in their homes, or maybe they've lost a job, or it's just the change. Change is difficult, right? Is anything stand out to you as to the advice you got from some of these folks?
Yes. So I've, in the past 20 years, I've made money, I've gone broke, I've made money, I've gone broke, I've made millions, and then I've gone dead broke where I've lost my house, family, everything. So I've been through my own personal crises on top of these kind of global crises, and many people have, but I'm not saying mine's more extreme. I've gone from having generations of wealth to literally $100 in my bank account and losing my home and the IRS posting signs all over the house and losing my family to then bouncing back. So I kind of built up my own foundational practice. And when I talk to these neuroscientists and therapists or psychologists or whatever, often they give me advice so I understand my own practice a little bit more and help me with my own practice. And my own practice is a sort of fill in the blanks kind of practice, which is what are you doing for physical health, emotional health, creative health, and then in a weird way, spiritual health. And so physical health is important because if you're sick, you're not going to come up, if you're sick in bed, you're not going to come up with creative ideas to start the next business. Emotional health, because if you're arguing all day with your spouse and your friends and your boss, you're still not going to come up, it's going to affect you physically and you're not going to come up with creative ideas. If you're not creative, you're just going to be going back to work as a paralegal and it's not going to help you at all. And if you're not, by spiritual health, I mean, don't try to obsess on the things you have no control over, which has been a challenge for me in this shutdown. So with physical health, everybody sort of repeats the same thing. which is you've got to sleep 8 hours a day. It's how you rejuvenate the brain. There's all this amniotic sac fluids that flow. I don't know the term. There's all these fluids that flow through the brain that get sort of the plaque that prevents Alzheimer's and strokes and other diseases, and it keeps you smart and sharp. So you got to sleep whatever your normal hours a day is. You got to sleep that. But here's what I've learned from like a neuroscientist. Okay, when you wake up in the morning, do two things or three things. One is maybe do 20 push-ups or do 5 minutes of walking or 5 minutes of exercise, because that gets the adrenaline going, and adrenaline increases your dopamine, which you want to shoot up in the morning, because dopamine increases your enthusiasm to meet the challenges of the day. It increases your energy. It increases your reward system, so you feel rewarded when you achieve mini goals and so on. And then on top of that, go outside for even just a few seconds so you get some morning sunshine hit the top of your eyes, because that's where dopamine receptors are. And it also signals to the body that, hey, now is morning. So that means 12 hours from now, I should start thinking about going to sleep. So that's how you start. That's how it all feeds in. It's better sleep if you do these things in the morning. And then set yourself a good, simple goal. Like, oh, I'm going to return 4 emails first thing in the morning, or I'm going to read 10 pages of a book first. So start setting mini goals for yourself up until noon, so that you feel the dopamine keeps getting replenished by you achieve these mini goals and you reward yourself.
Plus, you're setting a routine. You're kind of setting some structure there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, for instance, this guy mentioned to me the reason, whether they're aware of it or not, the reason, and he advises actually Navy SEALs and the military. The great thing about making your bed first thing in the morning is it's a mini goal. You achieve it. You have that first burst of dopamine. Now you have the energy to run a mile or whatever. And he said, look at 2 teams that play football. The winning team is jumping around, laughing. Seems like they could run forever. The losing team is all dejected. They're slumping off the field. They lost energy because it's the winning team got a huge surge of dopamine. So when you achieve these mini wins throughout the morning, you get that energy and focus and creativity. Now, you can get dopamine too by just flipping through your Facebook page, but it's kind of scattershot. It won't really help you. It's better. It won't help your focus, because it's also related to this other drug, acetylcholine, this other neurochemical, and he gets all into it. And I'm going to release that podcast, I don't know, in the next week or so. But that all connects with the physical health. And he also suggests skip breakfast, or he doesn't suggest. He said he does for himself, but skip breakfast, because dopamine is all about anticipating something good later. So if you achieve a goal, there's going to be some reward later. So when you skip breakfast, your body starts to anticipate, oh, I'm going to eat later, and dopamine starts to surge. It gives you energy to find that food for later. And then later in the day, move from having a dopamine focus to a serotonin focus. So this is when you start to, instead of trying to achieve yet another goal, you start to look around and feel grateful for what you have. Oh, I'm grateful I have this time off because of coronavirus. I'm grateful I'm with my family. I'm grateful for those mini goals that I achieved earlier. So, and that's, he calls serotonin kind of the here and now neurochemical. So be satisfied with where you are now. And that boosts the serotonin, which I'm getting all technical because I got really into this, but it suppresses or it triggers the GABA system, which suppresses thinking, which again, gears you up for sleep. And he says, dim the lights so it doesn't think your eyes don't think it's the morning light anymore. And all of this is to gear you towards more contentment in the afternoon and the evening, and connect with being of service to others, like call your family, call the elderly, call your friends. And then that gears you towards eventual sleep. And, in terms of emotional health, that is what it is. And in creative health, this is very important to me. Every single day, including today, including every day of my life, particularly since the last time I went broke, I make sure I always do this discipline. I always write 10 ideas a day, because I always view creativity as a muscle. If you don't exercise your muscles, they will atrophy extremely quickly.
You told me that 3 years ago that you had the waiter's pad and you were doing 10 ideas a day. And I hear you talk about, do you go back to mind and pull out ideas that you're going to execute on?
No, it's just exercise. It's totally just exercise, because when I really need good ideas, I always tell people, if you just do this for 3 or 4 months, by the way, still all of your ideas, most of your ideas are going to be bad. But if you do this for 3 or 4 months, it does rewire the brain, the plasticity of the brain. is all geared now to connect disparate concepts, connect them together.
That's what I missed. I started doing the exercise, but I didn't have that frame of mind around it, that it's just skill development.
It's skill development. And not only that, it's really important to do 10. You can't do 7.
All right, I'm going to pick this back up. I'm going to pick it back up. I thought I had to execute on some percentage of these things, so it became.
I mean, sometimes if an idea is exciting to me, I will execute on it, or at least what I'll do is I'll construct experiments. I'll come up with a list of 10 experiments I can do to test out an idea. I won't fully do an idea until I experiment pretty thoroughly. So a friend of mine came to me the other day with a business idea of, she was tie-dyeing shirts and pants and even surgical masks, and they were very beautiful. And I said, what are you thinking? And she says, I'm going to sell these on Etsy and Amazon and Shopify, and they're all going to be, I'm going to source all the materials in America, and it's going to be made in America, because her view is, and I agree, that there's going to be less globalism coming out of this, and people are going to want made in America outfits, particularly if they're beautiful and pretty. And she said, but I'm spending a lot of time now figuring out where to get all these materials in America and how to find a manufacturing facility that could put them together. And I said, well, just don't do that. Just go to China and make your outfits there trivially. It's very easy to do it in the place that's always been doing it. And she said, but then it won't have the made in America. And I'm like, well, put the made in America on it, not to lie, but just to see if they sell. And then if they start selling, then you've just tested your idea in a very easy way. Then you could start figuring out first you learn if there's a market. Then you could start bringing all the materials to America and doing the hard work of putting it together in America and so on. And she said, oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to do that. And I'm like, actually, don't even do that. Just make a Facebook ad. No, she said that too, but I said, make Facebook ads and use just like make a Facebook ads for all the different kinds of outfits, and just use a less than $200 budget, $500 budget, put the Facebook ads up and see what people click on. And she said, but don't I need a website? Don't I need to have them click on something? And I said, no, let them just click to nothing, but you'll still be able to use the Facebook ads manager to see how many times each ad was clicked. If none of your ads are clicked, then you don't have a product. If people are clicking on the sweatshirt but nothing else, then that's the thing you should focus on. And so that's an experiment that it'll honestly take less than 2 hours of her time and minimal budget, and she'll know just as much information about her business as if she outsourced as if she got all the materials in America, found a factory, printed everything up, set up a Shopify site, and started selling. She'll get the same information in an hour or two with a $400 budget and know the exact same information.
The business is customer acquisition. So you're proving that up front. And I think Facebook has a lead page you could actually use.
Yeah, there's lots of ways you could create the next few steps. But the hardest thing in the beginning, the thing you should experiment on is there a market, period? So again, that's the way I might use an idea machine in that kind of context, is to, people say ideas are nothing, execution is everything. Well, I just changed her execution from 6 months to 2 hours. So execution ideas are a subset of ideas.
First of all, creating an ad, sorry, I didn't mean to go on a tangent here, but creating an ad you have to crystallize what the offer is. You crystallize what the product is and how to sell it, which is key, right? So, just writing an ad.
This kind of intersects with another skill, which is, skill acquisition, the skill of skill acquisition, which is that if you can't explain something simply, then you don't really have the skill yet. Let's say I'm teaching you computer programming. If I can't explain a fairly complicated concept simply to you, then I don't really understand computer programming. So it's the same thing. If I can't make a simple ad that describes my product, then I don't really understand my product and who and what community it's serving and what it's doing and why the world needs this product and so on. I do think almost every industry, there's too much uncertainty. Like, it's really hard to answer that. Like we know anything with the word remote in it is going to do well. We know most tech is going to do well. So it's better to predict I know software storage, like data storage is going to do well because there's more content being created than ever. And with more people working remotely, there's going to be issues of storage mixed with security. So almost every tech thing you could think of is going to do well. And anything with remote, whether it's drones or just delivery services or Zoom and online working, although Zoom's a little bit of a commodity, but any kind of thing you could do with remote is going to do fine. And telemedicine, teletherapy, telelearning, all that's going to do fine. It's a little bit harder to predict. People need to eat. So can you say restaurants are going away? Like you said, people like to see movies. Some movie theaters are already dead. And some restaurants are already dead, but that might mean now's the time to compete. So it's hard to really say. I will say this: commercial real estate is going to have to change because they're not being bailed out. They're going to have a financial crisis. They're all and they borrowed billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. They're going to default. So I expect that financial crisis to happen, and it might be like a mini 2008. And so that keeps me away from the market a little bit.
Do you think there's going to be a huge flight out of New York?
Yes, because there was already declining population for 3 years in a row. And now if you were on the fence before, why would you? New York's disgusting. Why would you stay here?
Well, come on down.
Oh yeah, my wife and I, we were going to go down the week of May 13th. We already had contacted brokers in kind of near the Miami, Palm Beach, Delray area, like in that kind of belt. And, Wellington, Jupiter, all the different surrounding towns, but then I guess Florida might still be closed. So I was asking her, like, what are we going to do there? Once we get there, there's not going to be anything open. So we might wait a little bit. But yeah, I've been here. This is the third ground zero in New York City I've been through. I'm sick of it.
That would be cool. I'll just drive down. I'll do a podcast with you. That would be awesome.
Well, here's the thing I've been wondering. Like, I've lived in New York City for a really long time, and I'm involved with lots of. So I'm asking this. Like, I've been involved with a lot of subcultures. So whether it's kind of the writing subculture, the tech subculture, the entrepreneur subculture, now the stand-up comedy subculture, and New York City is really great for having lots of really intense, top of the world subcultures. But at the same time, New York City is weird about friendships. Like, I can't really say I've developed lots of really, really great friends in New York City. And I'm just wondering, my theory is, well, this is really my wife's theory because I asked her and she thinks maybe people value friendship more outside of New York City. And New York City is very transactional the way when you interact with people.
I'm trying to process what you said because I'm wondering why friendships aren't developed easily there just because of the density of people. Maybe that's why there's so many people. I don't know. That's weird.
It's like friendships you meet at work. If Bob is in the cubicle next to me, oh yeah, we could end up being best friends. But if suddenly Bob gets a new job, we could say to each other, oh man, let's still have lunch at least once a week. We're probably never going to talk to each other again.
Tell me about the new book. What's it about? When is it coming out?
So the book's coming out in next March 2021, and it's called Skip the Line. And it's basically, and it just by accident fits perfectly with what's happening now, which is that no matter what your age you are, whether you're 18, 45, 65, whatever, it's possible for you to change interests, careers, passions, purpose, and quickly skip the line to be in the top 1% of whatever is your new interest. So if let's say I switched my career and let's say I went from being a computer guy to I wanted to be a hedge fund manager. Everyone would say to me at first, you can't do that. You didn't major in investing. You didn't work at a bank. You didn't work for a hedge fund. You can't do that. But I did it, right? So, and I did it very quickly without doing any of those things. And so I skipped the line. I didn't pay my dues, so to speak. And I had techniques for learning and connecting and networking, and then learning even more and having a unique perspective. And suddenly I was in the top 1% of the field. Within a year, I was writing for the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times. I had a hedge fund and so on. And I was successful. And when I started doing stand-up comedy, people were like, you can't just think you could walk in here and go on the stage. You can't. I've been doing it 20 years. You can't do that. Like, you've been doing it nothing. Well, after a few years, in February, right before the lockdown, I toured all over the Netherlands doing stand-up comedy. When all the people telling me that they've been doing it 20 years, they're still driving trucks for Verizon. So skipping the line is something that I've spent my life doing. And I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people who have also done it, from billionaires to athletes to artists to writers to comedians. And so I've really studied this aspect of skipping the 10,000 hour rule even, and just very quickly getting to the top 1% of whatever field you become interested in.
When is that coming out, did you say?
March 2021.
I just wanted to say something, James. And this is some book you should probably write, maybe a small book, but you're really good at being vulnerable or open. Was that something that came easy to you?
No, it did not come easy to me at all. In fact, it's sort of like the more you have to lose, the less vulnerable you allow yourself to be. So when I first made money, and then when I first went dead broke, I was so ashamed. I couldn't tell anybody. And so I had to put my house up for sale. And by the way, it didn't sell because I was right next to the World Trade Center, and then 9/11 happened. And obviously, there was much worse things happened than me on 9/11, but it is what it is. So I put my house up for sale, and I put an ad in the newspaper, in the New York Times. And a friend of mine came up to me, a good friend, and he said to me, "Hey man, I see your house up for sale." And I was so ashamed. I said, "No, that's impossible. That must be a mistake." When clearly someone had to pay for the ad and take the photos and write the description of the house and everything. So I was just too ashamed to admit something that was obviously true. Like I was an adult male making an obvious lie. I was 2 years old, 33 years old, making an obvious lie to my good friend. And because I was so ashamed. And then it wasn't until about 2010 where I was just beating my head against the wall again and again and again. And finally, and by the way, I had less opportunities than I ever had despite having more experience over the past 10 years. And so I was like, just screw it. I can't deal with this anymore. So I just started writing, like I went broke and this is what happened. And I would just write the stories. And I was a good writer. I had been writing ever since 1990. So I started writing it, and my audience multiplied by 10 because suddenly I was tapping into something that everybody was experiencing, and that shame.
But where you were just like, I don't care. Fuck it. I'm writing this. I'm just done.
I was like that because also I had nothing going for me. So maybe I'd like to think it was really strategic on my part, but it wasn't. It was just like, I can't take it anymore. I'm just going to write this all up, and then I don't care. Like no one's going to read it. And then I wrote it, and then it just started going. Every article started going to some extent viral, which was a thing for articles back then. It doesn't really occur now, and which is a problem for being a writer now, is that everything's like 15-second videos now. So it's why I need more social media.
Well, you're my hero. Because I choke on publishing stuff.
My rule is, if you're not afraid when you hit publish, then don't hit publish. Because if you're like, oh, I'm gonna hit, and I even think this when I go up on stage for stand-up comedy. If I'm not feeling nervous, that means I'm about to say something or write something that's just not interesting, or that somebody hasn't, a million people haven't already said before. So if I'm afraid though, that means I'm revealing something that this article has my unique fingerprint on it, and it's vulnerable. And that's why it's so unique, because everyone else has been too afraid to write this. And so I'll be unique. I'll be this person standing in my own room. And that's what people are looking for. And, vulnerability, I kind of expand on that actually in this next book. Vulnerability equals freedom. So if you are vulnerable, now it opens you up. Like nobody can suspect that I'm the type of person who goes broke pretty regularly, because I'm like, all right, tell me something new.
It's a form of, you can't hurt me.
Yeah. I mean, and then it even becomes a challenge. So you don't want to then be gratuitous. Like you don't want to say, well, I did this or that, just to kind of get that, keep getting that response.
I just want everybody to know that.
Right. Like, so it's not radical honesty. It's vulnerability over something that's important to you. But like, for instance, one thing I realized I was ashamed of is in 2010, I was taking anti-anxiety pills. I was really anxious, and I only needed them for a short time, but what I didn't realize was how addictive they are. And I got really massively addicted to a fairly high dose of anti-anxiety pills. And you can't, if you just stop cold, you could get seizures, you could die. There's all these things that could happen. And if you keep taking them, you could get early onset Alzheimer's and so on. So I've been on this 10-year regimen of getting off these pills, and I'm still not completely off them. It's like kind of a 1/4 milligram every 6 months. I try to reduce, but then sometimes something bad will happen to me and I stay on it for a little while longer. So it doesn't even really do anything for me anymore, because I got tolerance back in 2010 and I keep reducing. So it's not helping me, but I'm still addicted to these things. And I realized I was ashamed of saying that. And so I wrote about that recently.
I'm assuming it's freeing to some degree. My skeleton is out of the closet. I'm not hiding. I don't know, something.
Yeah, I don't have to hide that. I don't have to yeah, the closet's a good analogy. I don't have to prevent people from looking in that closet.
One of the things I've noticed is Zoom may be making us all more vulnerable because I'm seeing newscasters showing their closets, their homes. I see famous news people without makeup. Now that we're all like this, I don't know. This may be good because we're all opening up. We're seeing the real people.
Well, that's a good point. For all the people kind of panicking or thinking or so upset that this lockdown's going on too long, and by the way, I am too. I think we should be open up. I think there's more deaths from other causes now that are happening, and we need to look at this holistically. But it's not all bad. There's good things too, and it's good for me. I had to cancel 7 trips during this lockdown, and you know what, that let me finish my book. It let me do these Instagram lives. It let me go on more podcasts. So you got to take the good with the bad sometimes.
James, thank you so much for coming on, man. I just love talking to you. I know you're super busy, but you've always taken the time to chat with me. And man, I'm really grateful. I really am. Thank you so much.
Larry, thanks so much for having me on. And look, I'll see you in Florida soon.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy. And the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit LarryWeeks.com, and we will talk again soon.